Respondents test, checking Hitchens for external contradictions with reality. Introduction. In the contemplative shadow of Christopher Hitchens' intellectual legacy, there stands a multitude of voices, ready to engage with the spirited critiques he presented against religious belief. Beyond the Razor's Edge, Refuting Hitchens' Challenge to Faith is not merely a book, it is a comprehensive systematic Christian response to the sharp arguments laid down by one of the most formidable atheists of our time. The literary and philosophical armory of Hitchens has compelled many to reconsider the foundations of faith. However, Chapter 1, The Razor-Sharp Mind, Understanding Hitchens. In the first chapter of Beyond the Razor's Edge, we embark on a quest to comprehend the intellect and arguments of Christopher Hitchens, a writer whose sharp wit and unapologetic criticism of religious thought have challenged theists and non-theists alike. Understanding Hitchens is not merely about analyzing his arguments, but also about appreciating the context from which they arise, a context marked by a profound appreciation for literature, a commitment to humanistic principles, and a relentless pursuit of truth as he perceived it. Hitchens' razor, an epistemological tool suggesting that assertions without evidence can be dismissed without evidence, is a central theme of his critique against religious belief. This chapter seeks to dissect that principle, examining its philosophical origins and evaluating its applicability to theological discourse. To understand the man behind the razor, we must delve into his background, influences, and the evolution of his thought. Born in 1949 in England, Hitchens was influenced by a myriad of cultural and intellectual currents of the 20th century. He was a voracious reader and was known for his admiration of authors such as George Orwell and Thomas Paine, who shaped his thinking on authority and the power of dissent. His education at Balliol College, Oxford, not only honed his intellect, but also exposed him to the ferment of political and social debate that would later characterize his work. The chapter examines Hitchens' journey from a Trotskyist to a self-identified anti-theist, outlining how his political ideologies were interwoven with his religious criticism. His move to the United States further expanded his platform, and his voice became an integral part of the public discourse on religion. The chapter provides a critical analysis of Hitchens' most significant work, God is Not Great, addressing his arguments against the plausibility of divine existence and the value of organized religion. The intellectual rigor of Hitchens' work demands a thoughtful response. This chapter does not aim to vilify or trivialize his perspective, but seeks to engage with it sincerely. Hitchens' arguments often revolve around the themes of the historical inaccuracies of religious texts, the problem of evil, the morality without divine oversight, and the dangers of religious institutions. Each of these points is explored in detail, laying the groundwork for the ensuing chapters, which will respond to these challenges from a Christian perspective. In understanding the mind of Hitchens, we confront not only a person, but also a symbol of the modern skeptic, a skeptic who is not content with simple answers to complex questions. The following sections of this chapter will dissect various facets of Hitchens' arguments. The literary lens, exploring how Hitchens' literary background shaped his rhetorical and analytical approach to religion. Political influences, understanding how Hitchens' political journey influenced his critique of religion. Hitchens' razor, a philosophical examination of this principle and its historical antecedents. The anti-theist, delineating the distinction Hitchens drew between atheism and anti-theism. The polemicist, analyzing Hitchens' style as a The literary lens, exploring how Hitchens' literary background shaped his rhetorical and analytical approach to religion. Political influences, understanding how Hitchens' political journey influenced his critique of religion. Hitchens' razor, a philosophical examination of this principle and its historical antecedents. The anti-theist, delineating the distinction Hitchens drew between atheism and anti-theism. The polemicist, analyzing Hitchens' style as a debater and public intellectual and how it shaped discourse. Core arguments, summarizing the central points of Hitchens' critique against theistic belief. The contradictions, investigating potential inconsistencies within Hitchens' own positions and arguments. By the end of this chapter, readers will have a deeper understanding of Hitchens, the man, the polemicist, and the anti-theist. They will be equipped to consider the Christian responses to his arguments not as a denial of Hitchens' intellect, but as a respectful counter-dialogue, grounded in the shared human experience of searching for truth. The literary lens, exploring how Hitchens' literary background shaped his rhetorical and analytical approach to religion. Christopher Hitchens was not just a journalist and a polemicist, he was also a literary critic and a writer with an expansive command over the English language and a profound appreciation for its literature. This literary background is crucial to understanding his approach to religion, which was as much influenced by his reading of George Orwell, James Joyce, and other literary giants as by any scientific or philosophical text. His style was marked by a confluence of erudition, wit, and a penchant for the poetic turn of phrase. This not only made his arguments compelling, but also imbued them with a kind of rhetorical force rarely seen in pure academic debate. When Hitchens debated religion, he did not merely present arguments, he crafted narratives, invoked characters, and called upon the authority of literary precedent. His essays and books on religion were peppered with references to Shakespeare, Milton, and Dickens, not just as decorative elements, but as integral to the fabric of his argument. He understood the power of narrative and myth, and he used this understanding to critique the grand narratives of religious texts, often arguing that they were, in a sense, inferior stories that promoted immoral acts, or that they failed to reach the heights of human literary creation in terms of moral and aesthetic value. Hitchens believed in the capacity of literature to reveal truths about the human condition that were every bit as profound as those offered by religion. This perspective allowed him to question the necessity and uniqueness of religious morality and insight. He saw human creativity and empathy, as expressed in literature, as a natural and superior source of moral wisdom. For Hitchens, Dostoevsky's Ivan Karamazov was as real and as significant a philosophical interlocutor as any historical theologian. In his rhetorical approach, Hitchens often employed the tools of literary criticism, analyzing texts, questioning authorship, interpreting symbolism, and understanding historical context. He applied these techniques to the Bible and other religious texts, looking at them through the same critical lens one would apply to any other piece of literature. This approach was a double-edged sword. It allowed him to dissect and question the narratives of holy texts critically, but it also opened him to critiques from theologians and believers who argued that he missed the divine inspiration and unique nature of religious scripture by treating it as mere literature. Hitchens' literary background also provided him with an arsenal of historical contexts. He often pointed to the evolution of religious texts over time, arguing that this evolution was evidence of their human rather than divine origin. His familiarity with the history of literature allowed him to trace the influences and changes in these texts in a way that challenged their static sanctity and infallibility. Furthermore, Hitchens was acutely aware of the role of the storyteller, which in many ways he mirrored as a public intellectual. His lectures and debates were performances, and his prose had the rhythm and punch of good narrative fiction. This made his critiques not only intellectually challenging, but also emotionally resonant, capturing the imaginations of his audience. By appreciating Hitchens' literary lens, we can better understand the depth and style of his approach to religion. He did not merely debate it as a philosopher or criticize it as a scientist might, he engaged with it as a storyteller, and this made his work both powerful and, at times, controversial. Hitchens' Razor, a philosophical examination of this principle and its historical antecedents. Christopher Hitchens was known for his incisive clarity of thought, often articulated through what has become known as Hitchens' razor, the assertion that what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. This principle echoes Occam's razor, the problem-solving principle attributed to the 14th century logician and Franciscan friar William of Occam, which suggests that simpler explanations are more likely to be correct than complex ones. Hitchens' iteration, however, applies specifically to the burden of proof in discussions and debates. The philosophical underpinnings of Hitchens' razor are deeply rooted in the skeptical tradition that places the onus of proof on the claimant. This principle is also grounded in the scientific method, which relies on empirical evidence and testability as the cornerstones of knowledge. By invoking this principle, Hitchens shifted the responsibility of substantiating religious claims to the believer, thus reframing the argument such that the default position was one of skepticism rather than belief. Historically, Hitchens' razor aligns with the empirical skepticism of David Hume and the positivism of A.J. Ayer, who both asserted that a claim must be verifiable to be meaningful. In a way, Hitchens' razor can be seen as a modern reiteration of these earlier philosophical positions, suited to the contemporary debate on religion and theism. Hitchens wielded this principle like a surgical blade, attempting to cut through what he saw as layers of assumption, tradition, and superstition that shrouded religious claims. It was his tool for intellectual honesty, demanding that claims, whether they be about the existence of God, the veracity of miracles, or the historicity of religious texts, be supported by something more than faith or revelation. Critics of Hitchens' razor might argue that it is overly reductive, dismissing experiences and phenomena that are not easily captured by empirical evidence. Moreover, some would claim that the principle itself cannot be proven by the means it demands for other assertions, potentially undermining its own validity. In the context of religious debate, Hitchens' razor serves as a challenge to the foundations of faith-based belief systems. It calls for a religion that can withstand the rigors of rational inquiry, and it sets the stage for subsequent discussions about the nature of belief, the evidential basis for religion, and the role of faith in understanding the world. For brevity, this analysis has been kept concise. A more in-depth examination would delve deeper into the philosophical and rhetorical implications of Hitchens' razor, including its 1. Debunking Hitchens' factual errors. In an appendix addressing Christopher Hitchens' factual errors, one would systematically review and correct specific inaccuracies found in his critiques of religion, Christianity in particular. This is not to diminish the intellectual rigor of Hitchens' work overall, but to provide clarifications where his arguments may have been based on misrepresentations or misunderstandings of historical, scientific, or scriptural data. Historical inaccuracies. Here, one would address any errors in Hitchens' recounting of historical events related to Christianity. This could involve misstated events, misrepresented figures and their actions, or oversimplified cause and effect relationships regarding religion's influence on historical outcomes. Scientific misunderstandings. Hitchens, in making his case against theistic belief, often invoked scientific principles. Any misapplications or misunderstandings of scientific theories or data would be corrected here. For instance, if Hitchens used evolutionary biology to make a point about morality that does not align with current scientific consensus, it would be addressed. Scriptural misinterpretations. This section would focus on instances where Hitchens may have misinterpreted or taken out of context passages from the Bible to support his arguments. It would offer exegesis that aligns with scholarly biblical interpretation, to provide a more accurate understanding of the text. Philosophical oversights, where Hitchens may have made philosophical assertions that are debatable, or where he might have overlooked alternative philosophical viewpoints, these would be discussed. The aim would be to show a broader range of philosophical thought on matters of religion, ethics, and metaphysics. Statistical errors, any incorrect use of statistics related to religious practice, belief, or the outcomes of religiously motivated actions would be reviewed. This would involve providing the correct data and explaining its implications for Hitchens' arguments. Misrepresentation of theological concepts. The appendix would also detail areas where Hitchens might have inaccurately represented Christian theology. It would clarify complex doctrines such as the Trinity, incarnation, atonement, and resurrection that Hitchens may have simplified or mischaracterized in his critiques. List of factual and scientific errors. Christopher Hitchens was a well-known writer, journalist, and critic, famous for his polemical style and his fervent atheism. His works, particularly those criticizing religion, have been both praised and criticized for various reasons. Here, I'll address some of the common factual and scientific errors found in his arguments, especially from his book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, which is one of his most famous works critiquing religion. 1. Historical inaccuracies. Claim. Hitchens often asserts that religious figures and institutions have been wholly detrimental to scientific progress. Reality. While there are instances where religious institutions have opposed scientific advancements, e.g., the Galileo affair, there are also numerous examples of religious individuals and organizations supporting and contributing to scientific progress. For instance, Gregor Mendel, an Augustinian monk, is known as the father of genetics, and the Jesuits have a long history of scientific contributions. 2. Misrepresentation of religious texts. Claim. Hitchens argues that religious texts are entirely immoral and that they endorse behaviors that are unacceptable by modern standards. Reality. Religious texts are complex and multifaceted. They include a wide range of literary genres, including poetry, allegory, law, and narrative. Many scholars argue that these texts need to be understood within their historical and cultural contexts. Furthermore, many religious traditions have developed sophisticated interpretive traditions that seek to understand and apply these texts in morally constructive ways. 3. Scientific misunderstandings. Claim. Hitchens sometimes conflates the Big Bang Theory with atheism, suggesting that the theory undermines religious belief. Reality. The Big Bang Theory, which posits that the universe had a specific beginning, was actually proposed by Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian Catholic priest and physicist. The theory does not inherently support atheism or theism. It is a scientific explanation of the universe's origins that is compatible with various metaphysical views. 4. Oversimplification of religious influence on morality. Claim. Hitchens claims that moral values are entirely secular and that religion corrupts innate human morality. Reality. This is a complex and debated topic in moral philosophy. While it is true that moral values can and do exist independently of religion, many religious traditions have contributed to the development of moral thought and ethical principles. The relationship between religion and morality is not one of simple opposition, it is a nuanced interplay that has evolved over millennia. 5. Cherry-picking evidence. Claim. Hitchens frequently highlights the worst aspects of religious behavior, e.g., wars, terrorism, while ignoring positive contributions, e.g., charity, education, social justice. Reality. While it is undeniable that religion has been associated with violence and oppression in some instances, it has also been a powerful force for good in many people's lives. Many religious organizations provide humanitarian aid, promote social justice, and foster community and personal well-being. 6. Ethnocentric bias. Claim. Hitchens sometimes presents Western Christianity as representative of all religion, thereby overlooking the diversity and complexity of religious belief worldwide. Reality. There's a vast array of religious traditions across the globe, each with its own unique beliefs, practices, and impacts on society. Critiquing religion from a predominantly Western perspective can lead to misunderstandings and misrepresentations of non-Western religions. 7. Philosophical reductionism. Claim. Hitchens often reduces complex philosophical and theological arguments to simple strawman arguments, making them easier to attack. Reality. Many philosophical and theological arguments for the existence of God or the value of religion are highly sophisticated and cannot be easily dismissed. Engaging seriously with these arguments requires careful consideration and understanding of the nuances involved. Conclusion. Christopher Hitchens was a provocative and influential figure, whose critiques of religion sparked much debate. While his arguments raised important questions, they were not without their flaws. Understanding these errors helps provide a more balanced view of the complex relationship between religion, science, and morality. 2. Debunking Hitchens, logical errors and fallacies. In addressing Christopher Hitchens' logical errors and fallacies, we would examine instances where his arguments against theism might have relied on flawed reasoning. Non sequiturs. Non sequiturs are logical fallacies where the conclusion does not follow logically from the premises. Christopher Hitchens, despite being an articulate and persuasive writer, sometimes used arguments that contained non sequiturs. Here are some of the non sequiturs in Hitchens' critiques of religion, particularly focusing on his book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. 1. Religion causes harm, therefore religion is false. Claim. Hitchens often argues that because religion has caused harm, it must therefore be false. Example. He cites religious wars, persecution, and oppression as evidence that religion is not true. Reality. The harm caused by adherents of a religion does not logically determine the truth or falsity of the religious claims. The ethical behavior of believers is separate from the metaphysical truth of their beliefs. A belief system can still be true, even if it is misused by its followers. 2. Religion is man-made, therefore God does not exist. Claim. Hitchens frequently states that because religions are created by humans, there is no God. Example. He points out the human origins of religious texts and institutions as evidence against the existence of God. Reality. The fact that religions have human origins does not logically preclude the existence of a divine being. Humans may have genuine experiences or insights that form the basis of their religious beliefs. The existence of God and the human construction of religion are separate issues. 3. Religious hypocrisy, therefore religion is invalid. Claim. Hitchens argues that because religious people can be hypocritical, their religion is invalid. Example. He highlights instances where religious leaders fail to live up to their own moral standards as proof that the religion itself is flawed. Reality. Hypocrisy among adherents does not necessarily invalidate the religion's teachings. People can fail to live up to their ideals without those ideals being wrong. This is a non sequitur, because the personal failings of individuals do not logically determine the truth of the religious doctrine they profess. 4. Religion has been violent, therefore all religion is bad. Claim. Hitchens often claims that because some religions or religious people have been violent, all religion is harmful. Example. He uses examples like the Crusades and religious terrorism to argue that all religion is bad. Reality. This is a non sequitur because it does not follow that because some religious expressions have been violent, all religious expressions are harmful. Many religious groups advocate for peace and do significant humanitarian work. 5. Science explains the universe, therefore there is no God. Claim. Hitchens suggests that because science can explain many aspects of the universe, there is no need for God. Example. He uses the advancements in cosmology and biology to argue against the existence of a deity. Reality. Scientific explanations do not inherently negate the possibility of a deity. Many people see science and religion as addressing different kinds of questions. Science addresses the how, while religion addresses the why. The ability of science to explain natural phenomena does not logically preclude the existence of a divine creator. 6. Religious diversity, therefore no religion is true. Claim. Hitchens argues that because there are many different religions, none of them can be true. Example. He points to the vast array of contradictory religious beliefs worldwide as evidence that all are false. Reality. The existence of multiple contradictory beliefs does not necessarily mean that all are false. It is possible that one religion is true, or that all contain some truth. This argument does not logically follow because the plurality of beliefs does not determine the truth value of any individual belief. 7. Religious texts have flaws, therefore religion is false. Claim. Hitchens often highlights inconsistencies and moral issues in religious texts as evidence that the religions themselves are false. Example. He critiques the Bible and the Quran for containing passages that are ethically problematic or scientifically inaccurate. Reality. The presence of flaws or problematic passages in religious texts does not necessarily mean the entire religion is false. Many religious traditions interpret their texts contextually and metaphorically. Additionally, the truth of a religion can be argued on other grounds, such as personal experience or philosophical reasoning. 8. Religion is unnecessary for morality, therefore God does not exist. Claim. Hitchens asserts that because morality can exist independently of religion, there is no need for God. Example. He argues that secular ethics can provide a robust moral framework without recourse to religious beliefs. Reality. The existence of secular morality does not logically disprove the existence of God. Many religious people argue that moral values have a divine foundation, but this is a separate issue from whether people can behave morally without religious belief. The non sequitur lies in jumping from the existence of secular ethics to the non-existence of a deity. 9. Religion has historical origins, therefore it is false. Claim. Hitchens often argues that because religions have identifiable historical beginnings, they are therefore false. Example. He discusses how different religions emerged at specific times and places, implying that their historical contingency undermines their truth. Reality. The historical emergence of religions does not necessarily affect their truth claims. Many philosophies and scientific theories also have historical beginnings, yet their truth is judged based on evidence and reasoning, not their origins. Conclusion. While Christopher Hitchens' critiques of religion are powerful and rhetorically effective, they often include logical non sequiturs that weaken his overall arguments. By recognizing these fallacies, one can engage more critically with his work and appreciate the complexity of the issues at hand. Logical fallacies. Christopher Hitchens was a master of rhetoric, but his arguments sometimes suffered from logical contradictions and fallacies. Here are some of the logical contradictions and errors found in Hitchens' works, particularly his critiques of religion. 1. Strawman fallacy. Claim. Hitchens often sets up simplified and exaggerated versions of religious beliefs to make them easier to attack. Example. He frequently portrays all religious believers as irrational or as holding absurd beliefs, without acknowledging the diversity and sophistication within religious thought. Reality. This oversimplification misrepresents the actual beliefs of many religious people, making his arguments less robust against more nuanced religious positions. 2. False dilemma, either or fallacy. Claim. Hitchens often frames the debate as a strict dichotomy between religion and science or between faith and reason. Example. He suggests that one must either fully accept religion and reject science, or embrace science and reject religion. Reality. Many people find a middle ground where they see no conflict between their religious faith and their acceptance of scientific findings. Theistic evolutionists, for instance, believe in both God and evolution. 3. Hasty generalization. Claim. Hitchens often generalizes the negative actions of some religious individuals or institutions to all of religion. Example. He points to examples of religiously motivated violence or oppression and uses them to argue that religion as a whole is harmful. Reality. This ignores the vast number of religious people and institutions that have acted ethically and contributed positively to society. Generalizing from specific cases to a whole category without sufficient evidence is a logical fallacy. 4. Ad hominem. Claim. Hitchens occasionally attacks the character of religious believers rather than addressing their arguments. Example. He often dismisses religious leaders or believers as hypocrites or fanatics without engaging with their actual beliefs or arguments. Reality. Attacking the person instead of their argument, ad hominem, undermines the logical integrity of his critique and does not effectively address the core issues at hand. 5. Reductio ad absurdum. Claim. Hitchens sometimes exaggerates religious beliefs to absurd conclusions to make them appear more irrational. Example. He might take a literal interpretation of a religious text and extend it to an extreme, absurd scenario. Reality. Many religious texts are not meant to be taken literally and are understood allegorically or metaphorically by believers. Misrepresenting these interpretations weakens his critique. 6. Begging the question. Claim. Hitchens occasionally assumes the truth of his conclusion in the premises of his arguments. Example. He might argue that religion is harmful because it is based on false beliefs, assuming that all religious beliefs are false as a given. Reality. This circular reasoning does not provide a substantive argument against religion. It assumes what it is trying to prove, thus failing to establish the conclusion independently. 7. Selective evidence, cherry-picking. Claim. Hitchens frequently selects only the evidence that supports his argument, while ignoring evidence that might contradict it. Example. He highlights instances of religiously motivated violence, but often overlooks examples of religiously motivated peace-building and humanitarian work. Reality. A comprehensive argument must consider all relevant evidence, both for and against the position being argued. Ignoring contrary evidence undermines the credibility of his critique. 8. Appeal to emotion. Claim. Hitchens often uses emotionally charged language and anecdotes to appeal to the audience's emotions rather than their rational faculties. Example. He vividly describes the atrocities committed in the name of religion to evoke anger and disgust. Reality. While emotional appeals can be powerful, they do not constitute logical arguments. They can distract from the need for rational analysis and critical thinking. 9. Equivocation. Claim. Hitchens sometimes uses ambiguous language or shifts the meaning of key terms in his arguments. Example. He might use the term faith in different ways, sometimes referring to blind belief without evidence, and other times to trust based on evidence, without clarifying the distinction. Reality. Equivocation can create confusion and mislead the audience, making it difficult to engage with the argument on a clear and logical basis. 10. Tu quoque fallacy. Claim. Hitchens occasionally responds to criticisms of atheism by pointing out flaws in religion, without addressing the original criticism. Example. When confronted with the atrocities committed by atheist regimes, he might counter by listing atrocities committed by religious regimes. Reality. This U2 fallacy does not address the original criticism, but deflects it. It fails to provide a defense of atheism on its own terms, and merely shifts the focus to the opponent's faults. Conclusion. While Christopher Hitchens was a skilled debater and a passionate critic of religion, his arguments were not without logical flaws. By identifying and understanding these contradictions and fallacies, one can engage more critically with his work and develop a more nuanced perspective on the complex relationship between religion, science, and morality. 3. Debunking Hitchens, epistemological errors. Epistemology concerns the nature and scope of knowledge, what we can know and how we can know it. When assessing Christopher Hitchens' work from a Christian perspective, identifying epistemological errors involves highlighting instances where his claims may be based on mistaken beliefs about the possibility or means of acquiring knowledge. Over-reliance on empiricism. Hitchens often championed empirical evidence as the primary or sole means of acquiring knowledge, particularly knowledge about the existence of God or the truth of religious claims. A potential epistemological error here is the dismissal of other forms of knowledge, such as rational intuition, testimony, historical analysis, or subjective experience. Christianity posits that while empirical science is a valuable means of understanding the natural world, it is not the only avenue to truth, especially in matters that transcend the empirical realm. Scientism. Related to the point above, Hitchens could be critiqued for leaning toward scientism, the belief that science is the ultimate path to knowledge. This stance often disregards philosophical arguments, metaphysical truths, or moral reasoning that cannot be tested or measured scientifically. An epistemological error occurs if Hitchens assumed that questions about God, meaning, purpose, or ethics must conform to the scientific method to be considered valid. Skepticism of historical religious claims. Hitchens expressed skepticism about the historical claims of religions, including Christianity. He may have erred if he applied a higher standard of skepticism to religious history than to secular history, thereby committing an inconsistency in his epistemological approach. Reductionism. If Hitchens reduced complex phenomena, such as consciousness or moral awareness, to purely physical or evolutionary explanations, he might be guilty of reductionism, an epistemological error that overlooks the possibility that some aspects of reality might not be fully explained by reduction to their components. Categorization of faith as non-knowledge. Hitchens regarded faith as antithetical to knowledge, an epistemological error from a Christian standpoint, which considers faith as a form of knowledge that is based on trust in the reliability of its source, God. To equate faith with a lack of knowledge, or with gullibility, is to misunderstand its role in Christian epistemology as a means of knowing grounded in a personal relationship with the divine. A section on epistemological errors in Debunking Hitchens would detail these points, arguing that Hitchens may have had a narrower view of knowledge than is warranted, and that a fuller epistemological analysis allows for the inclusion of religious knowledge as a legitimate category. It would aim to show that the Christian worldview encompasses a broader understanding of knowledge, one that incorporates but is not limited to empirical verification. 4. Debunking Hitchens' cognitive biases. Cognitive biases in Christopher Hitchens' critiques of religion. 1. Confirmation bias. Description: the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs or theories. Example in Hitchens' work. Hitchens consistently highlights examples of religious hypocrisy, violence, and ignorance, while systematically ignoring or downplaying instances where religion has had positive effects, or where religious individuals have made significant contributions to science, philosophy, and social justice. Impact: this bias results in a one-sided view of religion, emphasizing negative aspects and neglecting the positive contributions and complexities inherent in religious traditions. 2. Attribution bias. Description: the tendency to attribute one's own actions to external causes while attributing other people's actions to their character or personality. Example in Hitchens' work. Hitchens attributes religious violence to the inherent nature of religion and its doctrines, while viewing similar actions by secular ideologies as situational or contextual. Impact: this double standard skews the perception of religion, leading to an unfair judgment where religious actions are deemed more inherently violent or corrupt than those of secular ideologies. 3. Anchoring bias. Description: the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information encountered, the anchor, when making decisions. Example in Hitchens' work. Early evidence or experiences of religion's negative impacts heavily anchor Hitchens' views, making it difficult for him to objectively evaluate contrary evidence or positive aspects of religion later on. Impact: this results in a fixed negative perception of religion that resists change despite new evidence or perspectives, leading to a biased critique. 4. Overgeneralization. Description: the tendency to make broad generalizations based on limited evidence. Example in Hitchens' work. Hitchens generalizes the negative actions of some religious individuals or institutions to all of religion, painting the entire concept with a broad, negative brush. Impact: this leads to an oversimplified and unfair assessment of religion, ignoring the diversity and complexity within religious traditions and communities. 5. Availability heuristic. Description: the tendency to overestimate the importance of information that is most readily available. Example in Hitchens' work. High-profile instances of religious extremism and violence are more memorable and readily available in the media, which Hitchens disproportionately focuses on in his arguments. Impact: this distorts the perception of the prevalence and nature of religious behavior, making it appear more uniformly negative than it actually is. 6. In-group bias. Description: the tendency to favor one's own group, in this case atheists or secularists, over others, religious people. Example in Hitchens' work. Hitchens portrays atheists and secularists in a more favorable light, assuming they are more rational or morally superior compared to religious people. Impact: this bias creates an unjustified sense of superiority and an adversarial stance that overlooks common ground and potential for constructive dialogue. 7. Negativity bias. Description: the tendency to give more weight to negative experiences or information than positive ones. Example in Hitchens' work. Hitchens highlights negative aspects of religion, such as conflicts, persecution, and ignorance, while giving less attention to the positive impacts of religion, such as community building, ethical teachings, and charitable work. Impact: this bias leads to a distorted, overly negative view of religion that does not accurately reflect its multifaceted role in human history and society. 8. Hindsight bias. Description: the tendency to see events as having been predictable after they have already occurred. Example in Hitchens' work. Hitchens argues that the harmful effects of religion were obvious and inevitable, using historical events to claim that these outcomes were predictable. Impact: this oversimplifies complex historical and social dynamics, making it seem as though negative outcomes of religious belief were more foreseeable and unavoidable than they actually were. 9. Bandwagon effect. Description: the tendency to adopt certain beliefs or behaviors because many other people do. Example in Hitchens' work. The popularity of atheism and secular critiques of religion, especially among intellectuals and certain media circles, reinforces Hitchens' stance without sufficient critical examination. Impact: this bias leads to conformity and a lack of critical engagement with alternative perspectives, reinforcing existing beliefs rather than challenging them. 10. Dunning-Kruger effect. Description: the cognitive bias whereby people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. Example in Hitchens' work. Despite being highly intelligent and articulate, Hitchens is not a theologian or religious scholar. His critiques often overlook or misunderstand complex theological arguments and interpretations. Impact: this bias leads to overconfidence in his critiques and an underestimation of the depth and validity of opposing viewpoints. Conclusion: Christopher Hitchens' critiques of religion, while compelling and influential, are marred by several cognitive biases. Recognizing these biases provides a more balanced and critical perspective on his arguments, acknowledging both their strengths and their limitations. Understanding these cognitive biases enhances our own critical thinking skills, enabling us to engage more thoughtfully with complex issues. 5. Debunking Hitchens, checking Hitchens for internal contradictions, coherence test. Critically evaluating Christopher Hitchens' stance on religion reveals several internal contradictions within his arguments. Here, we examine key areas where his critiques are logically inconsistent. 1. Moral arguments. Claim. Hitchens argues that morality is better grounded in secular, humanistic principles rather than religious frameworks. Contradiction. Hitchens relies on concepts of good and evil that have historically religious underpinnings and appeals to objective moral standards. This is inconsistent with his materialistic worldview, which does not support the existence of objective morality. By invoking objective moral standards while denying any metaphysical basis for such standards, Hitchens' position is internally contradictory. His materialism undermines the foundation for the moral absolutes he critiques religion for lacking. 2. Freedom and determinism. Claim. Hitchens champions the importance of freedom of thought and expression. Contradiction. Hitchens also adheres to a strict materialistic determinism that negates free will. This is internally inconsistent because his advocacy for intellectual freedom conflicts with his belief that every thought, including his own, is the result of unguided physical processes. By promoting freedom of thought while denying the existence of free will, Hitchens' arguments are self-contradictory. His deterministic worldview invalidates the very concept of freedom he advocates. 3. Religion as a natural phenomenon. Claim. Hitchens argues that religion is a natural phenomenon arising from evolutionary processes. Contradiction. Hitchens criticizes religion as wholly negative and deleterious, which ignores the evolutionary premise that natural phenomena, including religion, have survival benefits. This is an internal contradiction because, if religion evolved naturally, it must have provided some evolutionary advantages, such as societal cohesion and psychological comfort. By dismissing all aspects of religion as harmful while acknowledging its natural origins, Hitchens' argument is fundamentally inconsistent. 4. Critique of dogmatism. Claim. Hitchens criticizes religious dogmatism and promotes critical thinking. Contradiction. Hitchens often presents his own views against religion dogmatically, without openness to counter-arguments or evidence. This is an internal contradiction, because his commitment to critical thinking and evidence-based reasoning should entail a willingness to revise his stance in light of new arguments or data. By being dogmatic in his atheism, Hitchens replicates the very flaw he attributes to religious believers. 5. Religion and violence. Claim. Hitchens asserts that religion is intrinsically violent or conducive to violence. Contradiction. Hitchens ignores the complex historical and social factors that contribute to conflict and fails to acknowledge the violence perpetrated by secular ideologies. This is an internal contradiction because it overlooks the multifaceted nature of human violence, which is not exclusive to religious adherence. By attributing violence primarily to religion while excusing secular ideologies, Hitchens' argument lacks coherence and consistency. Conclusion. Christopher Hitchens' critiques of religion contain significant internal contradictions that undermine the coherence of his arguments. His reliance on objective moral standards, advocacy for freedom in the face of determinism, dismissal of religion's evolutionary benefits, dogmatic stance, and selective attribution of violence reveal fundamental inconsistencies. Addressing these contradictions is crucial for a balanced and nuanced critique of religion, demonstrating the need for consistency and integrity in evaluating complex issues. Critique of dogmatism. Hitchens was a critic of dogmatic thinking, yet if his own views against religion were presented dogmatically and without openness to counter-arguments or evidence, this would be an internal contradiction. A commitment to critical thinking and evidence-based reasoning should entail a willingness to revise one's stance in light of new arguments or data. Religion and violence. If Hitchens claimed that religion is intrinsically violent or conducive to violence, yet ignored the complex historical and social factors that contribute to conflict, or if he failed to acknowledge the violence perpetrated by secular ideologies, his argument could be internally contradictory. It would overlook the multifaceted nature of human violence and the fact that violence is not exclusive to religious adherence. In debunking Hitchens, these potential internal contradictions would be explored to assess the coherence of Hitchens' critique of religion. The goal would be to demonstrate that a coherent critique must be free of self-contradiction and consistent in its application of principles across different arguments. By highlighting and addressing these potential contradictions, the book would aim to present a more nuanced view of religion and its role in human life. 6. Debunking Hitchens, correspondence test, checking Hitchens for external contradictions with reality. In philosophy, the correspondence test of truth asserts that a proposition is true if it aligns with reality or facts. Applying this test to Christopher Hitchens' arguments entails scrutinizing whether his claims about religion accurately reflect the external world and available evidence. 1. Religion and social well-being. Claim. Hitchens suggests that religion is detrimental to societal health and well-being. Contradiction. Sociological data shows positive correlations between religious practice and measures of well-being, such as lower rates of substance abuse and depression. This contradicts Hitchens' claim and suggests that religion can have beneficial effects on society. 2. Religion and scientific progress. Claim. Hitchens often argues that religion is inherently anti-scientific. Contradiction. Historical instances exist where religious individuals or institutions significantly contributed to scientific discovery. Examples include the development of the scientific method by religious scholars and the funding of scientific research by religious organizations. Additionally, many scientists are people of faith, challenging the notion of an inherent conflict between religion and science. 3. Religion and morality. Claim. Hitchens contends that moral behavior does not require religion and that religious morality is often flawed. Contradiction. empirical evidence shows that religious communities exhibit moral behavior at least on par with secular communities. Additionally, religious individuals or groups are often disproportionately represented in charitable and altruistic activities, contradicting Hitchens' assertion. 4. Religion and education. Claim: Hitchens suggests that religion hampers education and intellectual development. Contradiction: historical records demonstrate the significant role of religious institutions in founding universities, preserving knowledge through the Middle Ages, and promoting literacy and learning in various cultures. This contradicts the notion that religion inhibits education. 5. Religion and violence. Claim: Hitchens frequently attributes a significant portion of historical and contemporary violence to religion. Contradiction: evidence exists of non-religious motivations being primary drivers in many conflicts. Additionally, religious teachings have inspired peacemaking and reconciliation efforts, challenging the assertion that religion is inherently violent. In debunking Hitchens, a correspondence test would meticulously evaluate these claims against empirical data and historical records. By highlighting areas where Hitchens' arguments do not correspond with evidence, the book would offer a more balanced and empirically grounded perspective on the interplay between religion and various aspects of human civilization.